The Native Americans believed that nature was very much alive and that if you listen to it, it would communicate to you when something is wrong. And so when the woods go silent, that is nature telling you something is coming, whether that be a bad storm, whether that be a predator or something else. When it gets quiet, something is around. Now, this story comes out of North Carolina. There was this man named Joe. Joe and his two friends decided they were going to go hiking in the Appalachian Mountains. Now, they had found this trail and they'd hiked it a couple times, but they hadn't really gone too far. This particular time, they get there and they are hiking for a couple hours. Well, they find this small trail that juts off this larger trail and they start walking down it. As they got a good distance in, they started to notice that the woods around them was getting very thick. There was like this thick brush, and it started to get darker and darker because all of this brush was blocking out the sunlight. And they said they got to a point where, it almost seemed like it was nighttime because of how thick the brush was around them. And they also noticed that it was really, really quiet. And they couldn't hear insects, they couldn't hear the sounds of the wind, they could not hear anything. And they start to get freaked out like, what's going on? Like, why has everything gotten quiet? Finally, they hear this loud rushing sound of something moving through the woods. And they said, it must have been very, very large because they could hear like what sounded like tree branches and, bushes being pushed over. That's when they glanced out of the corner of their eye. This 7 foot, 8 foot tall looking deer that was standing on two legs and it was moving through the brush. And they immediately like panic. They take off running. And as they're running, Joe sort of gets behind and he's having trouble keeping up. Unbeknownst to him, he turns down the wrong trail and loses his two other friends. Well, he can't find his friends anywhere and he's like yelling for them, like, hey, where are you guys? Where are you? Like, I'm freaked out. Like, where are you? And that's when he said, all of a sudden, from behind the brush onto the trail steps this 7 foot tall, what he described as half man, very muscular, but it had the upper half of like a deer, and it had a deer face, and it had antlers, and it had these bright yellow eyes. And he said this thing just stood there on the trail, and he was just kind of frozen. He didn't know what to do. This creature proceeds to walk up to him, and he said he got within a couple inches of his face, and all of a sudden he sees his tongue that looked like an anteater tongue just come out and start touching his face all the way around. And he said this thing then turned and it took off running into the woods. And he said it was almost if he was no longer interested in him. And so he takes off running after this and he's, screaming, yelling for his friends. Well, finally, boom, he runs into his two friends on the trail. And he's like, yo, we got to get out of here. There's something out here. Like, we need to leave now. And his two friends are like, well, let's go this way. Let's go this way. And he's like, well, why do you want to go that way? Like, that's the wrong way. And they're like, no, 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 we got to go this way. So he starts following them a little bit. And as he's following them, he's kind of looking at them and he notices they keep smiling at each other and then they smile at him and they're acting kind of very erratic. And that's when he realizes, like, wait a second, these are not my friends. So he turns and he just takes off running as fast as he can in the opposite direction. Eventually, he runs into the trail that he recognizes, the larger trail, and he makes it back to the parking lot where his two friends are waiting by the vehicle. And they're like, hey, Joe, are you all right? Like, what happened? And he's like, I don't know, after we were screaming and stuff and we seen that weird thing, I got lost and that creature was like chasing me. And they're like, what are you talking about? And he's like, when we seen that weird thing in the woods. And they were confused because they said that Joe just was walking with them on the trail. He turned, he started screaming, and he took off running. And they had a whole different recollection of things that happened. Well, Joe said, you know what, let's just get out of here right now. I don't care. He gets in the car, they go back home. Well, he said later that night, he's talking to his grandfather, who was Native American, and he starts telling him about this encounter that he had. And he said his grandfather was like, no, 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 be quiet, do not talk about this. He said, what you seen in those woods, you got lucky because it didn't choose you, but we cannot talk about this anymore. We have to be quiet about it. And he said, still to this day, he has no idea what he's seen in those woods.